Good evening, everyone. We're just going to give it a few more minutes before we get started. And you're at the Navigating the School System, and this is the third installment. All right. Good evening, everyone. So again, this is the third installment to our three-part series, Navigating the School System. And it's giving you key information on how you and your child or students can be successful in the school system. Okay, so please feel free to use the chat or raise your hand at any time if you have any questions. And this presentation will be recorded later on, so you can access it through YouTube. Okay. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the land. Today I'm hosting a meeting from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe of Mississauga, adjacent to the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, and in the treaty territory covered by the Williams Treaty. So, how do you acknowledge the land? So, a few weekends ago, I drove up north and I got to see the beautiful leaves changing color. And I just really got to reflect on it and how beautiful and vast our land is. And I was up at the Forks of Credit Provincial Park, and it was just gorgeous. I love this time of year. I love seeing the colors, and but I'm also reminded of the flip side, which is all the natural disasters that are happening, the hurricanes, the tornadoes, the floods, and the droughts, the forest fires. And I'm cognizant that we need to really be careful and take care of our land. Um, we're only here for a borrowed time. We don't own the land, and it's important that we take care of it. And this week I learned that you can recycle your light bulbs. I had no idea. I used to throw them in the garbage, but light bulbs can be recycled, so we're taking them out of the land waste. And so our Black legacy statement today. So I wish to acknowledge my ancestry, a deep and profoundly relevant history of Black peoples across the diaspora, a history, lineage, and inheritance that predates this country, chattel slavery, and colonialism, and begins with Africa. So, an ancestry that recognizes the struggle and survival while honoring our a narrative of pursuing and determination. Today, I stand valued and grateful to be proud to be Black. And then I'm going to segue that in with a little video.
A high school referee in New Jersey made this wrestler choose between his hair or his sport. His hair or his sport.
You know I'm proud to be Black, y'all, and that's a fact, y'all. And if you try to take what's mine, I take it back, y'all. It's like that. Liggy, 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 liggy. Party people, here's a serious song. It's right, not wrong. I should say right on. I gotta tell you something that you all should know. It's not a mystery, it's history, and here's how it goes. Now Harriet Tubman was born a slave. She was a tiny Black woman, but she was raised. She was living to be given. There's a lot that she gave. Is not a slave. In this day and age, I'm proud to be Black. I'm proud, and I'll say it out loud. I'll share my story with the whole crowd. You know I'm proud to be Black, y'all, and that's a fact, y'all. And if you try to take this, I take it back, y'all. It's like that. DMC, the man that's causing the grief. I got a message for the world, so listen up this brief. Like Malcolm X said, I won't turn a right cheek. Got the strength to go to lengths. If you want to start beef, start beef. You know I'm proud to be Black, y'all, and real brave, y'all. That could never be a slave, y'all. So take that. Gonna tell you something, put your mind in the swirl. God bless the next baby that comes to this world. The world full of hate, discrimination, and sin. People judging other people by the color of skin. I'll take this matter in my own way, man. I ain't no slave, I ain't feeling no hate. We're in a tight position in any condition. Don't get in my way, cause I'm full of ambition. I'm proud to be Black, and I ain't taking no crap. I'm fresh out the pack, and I'm proud to be Black. So take that. There was a man, an inventor who invented the well. He invented a fortune for a man named Bell. George Washington Carver made the peanut great. Showed any man with a mind could create. You read about Malcolm X in the history text. Jesse Owens broke records, I broke necks. What's wrong with your man? How can you be so dumb? Like Dr. King said, we shall overcome.
All right. I love that video. I love playing that. So for today's discussion, we have Nicholas from the Durham Family Cultural Center. He's just going to give us a little bit of information about his program. We're going to talk about Kujenga Wellness Project, who we are, healthy families, anti-Black racism in school, what you can do to counteract it, and inclusive student services, which is formerly special education. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Nicholas. Oh, wait,
Thank you
sorry.
for having
There we
me.
go.
Can everybody hear me? I hope. Okay. Yeah, so I am Nicholas Barham. I'm a student and family advocate for Durham Region. And what that entails is that I help Black families navigate the education system, which is kind of in line with what we're talking about today. So I'm happy to be here as a support. And for us at Durham Family and Cultural Center, we're located in Ajax, but we serve Black and racialized families in the Durham region, and we provide support and space through support for families who are dealing with educational barriers, barriers with the judicial system or the youth justice system. Also, we have a family outreach service that helps families who are navigating the system, uh, uh, navigating all systems, which is child welfare, um, youth justice, and all systems generally. So they help support families. And we also have upcoming youth program that's going to help youth kind of navigate where they are in the world and kind of talk about youth issues. So back to myself, what I do is I help navigate the education system, like I said before. And what that looks like is that I help families who are could be in conflict with the school, whether there's issues of anti-Black racism, whether they are navigating inclusive services, or just kind of need help connecting with the school. Because unfortunately, sometimes we're finding that families are not feeling connected to the school and not feeling connected to the teachers or administration. And then sometimes I'm there to kind of be a go-through for them, for those families. I also provide meeting support. So if parents need someone to go with them to a meeting because they may not understand everything, I provide that service as well. And this is all funded by the government. It's a free service for families. And so I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to lend my support in any way that I can. Um, and obviously, I'm going to leave my contact information for everybody to see. So you can get in contact with me via phone, email. I'm always available and willing to take calls for consultation. It doesn't always have to be super formal, but I do love to help families and Black families in Durham region, and this is kind of a dream position for me just to kind of give back and be a support. So I'll put my information in the chat. You can see all my information, and then you could check our website as well to see what we have going on. So there we go. I put it in the chat, and thank you for having me. I'm very thankful to be here.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, for coming. This is something that is so needed within our school system today. I'll briefly talk about myself too as well, but we really appreciate that. And I'm loving the supports that we're having for our youth within the school system. So thank you so much. And your contact information is below, but also Kajanga can forward any concerns to you too as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, again, for me, myself too, I'm Melissa. I work within the Durham District School Board. So I'm an educator within the system. And again, working within the system and seeing the disparities within the system, I think it's so important that we have supports to help our children be successful. Okay, so we're looking at really counteracting that anti-Black racism within the system. And there's so much supports now available that we can overcome it. So I recently gave birth to a little baby boy, and I'm an avid carnival goer, and I love to help within the community. So our jumping off quote today, our inspiration is, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And we're using this platform, this panel, as a way to educate others to change the world, to change the outcomes, right? To really make a difference within the community. So we're just going to do a check-in, which is, what is the weather forecast that you're feeling today? So you can use the chat if you want to. You can just put a happy face, sad face, if you're partly cloudy, sunny. Today I am partly cloudy. Just a lot been going on. especially within the world, but within family, within life, it's just so partly cloudy. I know that there's always things to be thankful for, so it's not completely overcast, but definitely partly cloudy today for sure. Let's see. We have some people who are cloudy. Anybody else? Anybody sunny today? I know we're going to have a beautiful weekend. It's going to be a really sun-filled weekend, so that would be nice. Oh, chat is disabled. Oh, okay, perfect. Let me see if I can. Okay, there we go. I opened up the chat. Overcast. Yep, I hear you. Yeah, and I always like to check in because sometimes we're so go, go, go that we never really check in to see like, how am I doing? How am I feeling? So it's always good to just sit back and reflect and be like, okay, if I'm overcast, how can I feel better? So about us. So Kajenga Wellness Project is a Black-led grassroots organization designed to provide community supports. So we are founded in Durham region and we're just supporting communities and families. So we've given away gift cards, we've helped with grocery basket deliveries, just any way to really impact the community. And it's from a holistic approach. So providing education services, promoting mental health, wellness, healing, all from trauma. So we do workshops, parenting support. So there was a good co-parenting series that was on over the summer. So if parents were separated or trying to co-parent, really good and valuable information with that. We do communication, community navigation and support. So similar to the Durham Family and Cultural Center, just helping you navigate the community too as well. If you need support within the school systems, we help that too as well. The criminal justice system, any system that you may find yourself in, we can help support that. We do family outreach, like I said, gift cards, just things to help within the community. And this right here, webinars and community-based resources. So now that we've gone all digital in the world, we also provide webinars. This webinar will be available online afterwards so that you can go back if any information that you may have missed, or if you're in the kitchen and you might have missed some information, you can go back and look at it. So we have the stress burnout questionnaire. So there's a few questions. I want to see if I can get my poll going. Oh, here it is. Okay, I gotta close it off on here. All right, so I just posted out a poll. So the first question is, I feel run down and drained of physical or emotional energy. So you can either click not at all, rarely, sometimes, often, or very often. So me being a new mom, very often. I am harder and less sympathetic with people than perhaps they deserve. Not at all, rarely, sometimes, very often. The next question, I'm easily irritated by small problems or by my coworkers in my team. Not at all, rarely, sometimes, often, or very often. I feel misunderstood, unappreciated by my coworkers. And 5, I feel I have no one to talk to. 6, I feel under an unpleasant level of pressures to succeed. 7, I feel I'm achieving less than I should. And 8, I feel like there's more work to do than I practically have the ability to do. Oh, we're doing 10. 9, I feel like I'm not getting enough, not getting what I want out of my job. And 10, I find that I do not have the time to plan as much as I would like to. So take a moment just to answer those questions. See some answers populating in. And definitely, if you are answering very often to all or most of them, definitely sign of stress burnout and time to kind of seek support, resources for that. So I'm just going to give a few more moments. I know the energy one, especially as the winter is coming, I feel the energy slowly slipping away. And as the days get colder, the nights get longer. Very mindful of that. All right, let's end the poll. All right, so it seems, let's just share the results. So yeah, so you can see there's some people are really happy. But it does seem like, you know what, at this time of year, there's a lot of stress. See which one stands out. Oh, so, and it's good. So the one that I feel I have no one to talk to, there are some people who do have people that they can talk to. So that's really good. It's so interesting that I feel I'm under an unpleasant level of pressure to succeed. The majority of the crowd put sometimes, often, and very often. So that one's important to know. And the majority of crowd put often for I feel run down, drained of physical and emotional energy. So yeah, that is real. All right, let's give some facts here. So during the period from April to June in 2021, so last year, a quarter of Canadians reported experiencing high levels of stress most days, and nearly half of Canadians considered that their stress levels were worse than prior due to the pandemic. So these are some stats from Stats Canada, and I always like to put a lens on it for Black people because, again, we have that intersectionality there too as well. So it also reported that women aged 25 to 54 who were living with children also said that they had higher levels of stress, especially since having to do the online schooling, having children always getting sick, which was very high. So you can see like even half the Canadians from before the pandemic to now feeling that they're more stressed. And if you ever sit and listen to the news, which I try not to do, like the crimes that are happening, you're like, this is not what it used to be. Like you're hearing so much random, violent, and really harsh acts of crime happening, and you're like, people are not okay. So we really need to be mindful of that and really take care of ourselves because it's important that you take care of yourself and really take care of others because the pandemic really did hit hard. So I know we see this time and time again on how to cope with stress, but it's important to like really think back and say like, okay, am I doing some of these things? So listening to music, podcasts, physical activity, reading, meditation, all those things that we know, like yoga, if you practice, going to church, accessing therapy. I'm going to ask the crowd here, like, what are some things that you do to de-stress or cope with stress? I like to, it's not on there, but watch TV, like literally sit down and watch my reality television shows. I love to. So to you out there, any of the attendees want to like write in the chat, like, how do you cope with stress? How do you take care of yourself? Because it's proven, like, especially since inflation, things are getting more expensive. I don't know if you grocery shop, but groceries are ridiculously priced now. How are you coping with this stress? Oh, we have some people that they go to bed. Sleep, yes, sleep. I love that. Dancing, yes, dancing is so important. Awesome. Spend time with family. That's awesome. I find sometimes sleep can make me more stressful because I'm sleeping too much and I'm like, I got things to do. But spending time with family, that's huge, so important. Awesome. So I wanted to touch also briefly on COVID in schools. So we know that, the last school has been so interrupted the last few years that we're finally getting some sense of normalcy and some consistency. So I wanted to share with you the tracker, and this is the absence tracker. So you can, if your student attends the Durham District School Board, you can actually see how many students are away due to an illness and how many students are away due to COVID. So let me just go into here. And this is the COVID absence tracker. So you can see it shows all the schools here, secondary and elementary schools, and it will show you absence, positive COVID test. So if they were absent from school today because they had a positive COVID test, and it just shows you how many students were absent due to that. And then absences due to just an illness. So unrelated to COVID. So it kind of gives you an idea if you do have a student or a child who is immunocompromised, thinking like, okay, so they're not going to report the cases like they used to, but you can look and see, you know what, oh, this is 13% of the kids at Northern Dancer were out just for illness. So you can say, okay, you know what, maybe I won't send my child to school today. Or if you're noticing like the lower percentages down here, like we have, oh, those are Julie Payette, only 2.3% of the students were out due to illnesses. So you can kind of get a gauge of the healthiness of the students at school and how many students are actually homesick, or if they're, or even if the classes have been closed or schools have been closed. So again, we've been really fortunate right now that we've had no classes, no schools closed today, no classes or cohorts today. Okay, so it kind of gives parents a little bit of window in to see what is happening at the school and to keep an eye on the COVID cases within the school. Again, it's not the accuracy, it's only as accurate as the parents who report. Again, if you, some people choose to come to school even though they have symptoms. So you do want to take it with a grain of salt, but it's a good visual and it's good information. So again, just a reminder on staying safe and healthy during the pandemic, where they are predicting that the flu season is going to be higher this year because of everything that's been happening. So the CDC recommends vaccines, making sure you do your daily checklist. Again, if you have symptoms, you stay home, the hand washing, all those things that but it's always a good reminder. So masking too as well. Like if your student is, or you have someone at home who's immunocompromised, making sure they have a mask on at school, they take clean ones in their bag too as well to change, because we want to curb the spread. We're living with it now, but we also want to kind of curb the spread and we want to make sure that people stay healthier longer. So I'm just gonna check the Q&A and see if we have any questions here. Okay, perfect. All right, so, oh, sorry. Another big safety concern that kind of came up out of the pandemic too as well was that during the first wave of the pandemic, social media use increased by 60%. So yeah, I was watching it today on Cityline and I was like, whoa, 60%. And I think social media use came up a little bit faster than we were able to really help children navigate and really give them the tools to use internet safely and use social media safely and smart. So I'm just going to go over some internet safety tips. Here we go. So this is really, really important because students and the younger they're getting social media and they're getting access to things so much younger now that it's really important that we, as parents and guardians, really monitor that. So spending time online together to teach your children appropriate internet safety behavior, because again, we have accounts that are made, bullying, cyberbullying happening. It is at an all-time high. Keeping the computer in a common area is so important so that you can watch and monitor. Computers really, like if you have it in the room, it's hard for you to monitor what your child is looking at, accessing, all that kind of stuff. You want to bookmark kids' favorite websites so that they can easily access them. So they're not having to Google search. And if they type something wrong or they accidentally type the wrong word, they're not redirected into a wrong site. Checking your credit card and phone bills for unfamiliar account purchases. I know we've heard Amazon accounts that were like $5,000 and $10,000 because kids were just buying things, especially with the apps too as well. Find out, this one's a key one. So find out what online protection is offered at like your child's school. So how are they accessing the internet? At their friend's house or places at the library where they could be using a computer without supervision. So keeping that in mind because they may be accessing something and there's no adults around, right? And take your child seriously if they report feeling uncomfortable about being online or they have an exchange. So really listening to them and seeing, okay, what's really going on? So also watch out for the warning signs of children being targeted by an online predator, which can mean that they're spending longer hours on the computer, phone calls from people that you don't know. Again, if you're checking their smartphones and cell phones to see, oh, I don't know this number, who keeps calling you at this time? Unsolicited gifts arriving in the mail. And I know we think it's far-fetched, but these things happen and these things have happened. Your child suddenly turning off their computer when you walk into the room. Withdrawal from family life and reluctance to discuss online activities. And definitely when we see like a change in behavior or a shift in your child's behavior, we want to kind of investigate and see what's the cause of that, okay? Because it happens so quickly and it could be one exchange, one picture that can really take a downturn for kids and students. So it's so important that we really take a minute and really see what's happening with the online usage and definitely being mindful of that. So do we have any questions so far? I think that was all the questions there. So those are the things that I want to overview at the beginning of the presentation. I wanted to take like a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to talk more about anti-Black racism within the school system. So this part's a little bit heavier and how we can counteract that. So I wanted to kind of give us a break before we did get into some of the heavier topics and some of the statistics that are happening within, if you're within the Durham region, what's happening within the Durham board. So if you need to, grab a coffee, get up and stretch. When I was teaching online, we would always say like after 20 minutes to get up, walk around, take a break, and then come back to the computer because the screen time can be so much for your eyes. So we're going to take a 5-minute break and we're going to come back at 7:40. All right, we're back. Okay, perfect. Hopefully everyone had like a good 5-minute break just to kind of recharge, reset, grab some water if you needed to. All right, so we're going on to the anti-Black racism portion within education. So I'm gonna put this picture up here and I wanna see if anybody knows who this woman is. And I'll wait. Anybody, does anyone know who this woman is? No idea. Fair, that's the point. So this is Mary Ann Shadd Cary. So she was the first Black female newspaper publisher in Canada. Who knew, right? She founded and edited the Provincial Freeman. She also established a racially integrated school for Black refugees in Windsor. And she played an important role in giving Black people a voice and advocating for women's rights. We don't learn about her. When we think about Black history, we think about Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, but these are Canadians and these are Canadian heroes that we don't know and we don't see, like female newspaper publisher, right? I have another one for you. And we also, now that we've gotten information about Viola Desmond, we know about her too, but do we know about this woman right here? Again, crickets. And this is Violet King. So she was the first Black Canadian to obtain a law degree in Alberta and the first Black person admitted to the Alberta bar and the first Black woman to become a lawyer in Canada. And we all know that it's not easy. Even going through the system now, it's really hard. She was also the first woman appointed to an executive position within the YMCA within the United States. I will look that up for you. And this was, I think this is recently. This is not too long ago. This is definitely the 19 something. So, but this speaks to like a bigger systemic problem that we have where we're not learning about influential Black Canadians. So Black students are not seeing themselves reflected into the curriculum and being successful doing awesome things. And we know like trying to overcome the systemic racism, like being the first Black Canadian to obtain a law degree, that's huge, right? And these are people that we should learn about, and these are who we should study. So that kind of segues into racism in education. So there's a great video that is online, and it talks about the effects of anti-Black racism within the classroom. And I'll just play it for you, and then we can discuss if you have any questions.
Question here, because a lot of Canadians across the country are hesitant to accept the fact that there is.
Welcome back, everybody. We've been having ongoing discussions both on and off this show about how to dismantle the anti-Black racism that shows up in virtually every area of our lives. And today, we are going to discuss how racism shows up in the classroom. Joining us is equity consultant and former teacher, Kika Ojo-Thompson. Welcome to the show, Kika.
Hello, Melissa. Nice to see you.
Kika, I'm going to start with the first question here, because a lot of Canadians across the country are hesitant to accept the fact that there is anti-Black racism or systemic issue in the school. What kind of numbers, what kind of proof do you have that you can perhaps enlighten the folks out there?
Well, across the country, we are seeing an overrepresentation of African descent people, Black students in sort of all of our negative outcomes. So suspensions, expulsions, streaming, graduation rates, and the rates of students going off to post-secondary.
So let's talk about the curriculum, because it's important what kids are learning, and it's also important to highlight what they're not learning. And so where is the curriculum, generally speaking, across this country falling short?
Well, it's so interesting because just like in the Canadian narrative, we sort of don't talk about race, racism, or anti-Black racism. We see a similar pattern in our curriculum. So there's no conversation about race, racism, anti-Black racism. In fact, I was a high school teacher. I was a history and social science teacher. And I can tell you that in our curriculum, there is no sort of mandate to teach anything about, what is the second largest continent on our planet, and that is the continent of Africa. So we teach our children nothing about Africa. We don't talk about race, racism, and anti-Black racism in this country, but we have a significant history around the presence of Black people in this country and the institution of slavery. And it's so interesting to me because I often meet professional adults who, upon my discussion about slavery in Canada, it's often the first time for them that they'd heard of such a thing, and so they're often sort of shocked and have a lot of questions. And so, yes, we had a couple of centuries worth of slavery in this country, and there are all kinds of remnants and vestiges of that time here with us today. And the critical way that we see it in our school system with regards to curriculum is in the invisibilizing of African descent people, of Black people in our curriculum.
I have a friend, Paula Davis. She's a teacher, Miss Davis. And you were a teacher, Mel was a teacher. And I think a lot of people assume that perhaps a teacher can perhaps integrate lessons into the curriculum, but it's not that easy. How is it not that easy? You were a teacher, and I'm sure you were very passionate, but you can't always teach what you would like to teach.
Yes, thank you for that question, Andrea. It's, I think it's the missing part of the conversation is this idea of, the hyper focus on teachers and what they're doing. And I do think there, is definitely a place for talking about the role of teachers in this work, absolutely, and sort of, what they're learning about anti-racism and anti-Black racism in order to do their jobs well, in order to be in best practice. And there's complexity around what happens inside of a school, right? So teachers that are watching today can attest to the fact that when you take on a new course, you get handed a binder. The binder is full of what everyone taught for that course before you. And, you have a choice to make. Will I stick with the status quo, or will I chart my own course? But in charting your own course, there's absolutely pushback. And, having taught history and social science, I can tell you that I experienced direct pushback from my peers for some of the curriculum I was teaching, which was a social justice curriculum. So sticking with all the requirements and regulations of the ministry and the expectations, in fact, going above and beyond it, frankly. But also, teaching about racism and sexism and classism and ableism and heterosexism, teaching about all those things. And there was definitely pushback, both from some of the parents as well as from my peers. So I had heavy choices to make every day around what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and just following the curriculum alone is already so difficult. Let's talk about discipline, because this is where we do see, as you mentioned in that early chart, such a stark difference when it comes to how some children are disciplined versus others. So take us through that.
We have built our systems as though the system of education is neutral. We've built our system as though there is no racism, no anti-Black racism, and thus have not put in the checks and balances, the mechanisms, the procedures, and the practices. So when we talk about discipline, then we've left it up to the discretion of the individuals in charge, up to the teachers, up to the vice principals and the principals to make decisions. Well, we're ignoring then the ideas that they personally hold. In addition to the system at work, we have individuals making decisions and using discretion harshly every day, not giving the benefit of the doubt, calling the police instead of calling mom and dad. And this is some of the reaction or the outcome that we see. There's one case that I really want to make sure that we talk about, which is, in the Peel District School Board in 2016, we saw in September of 2016, we saw, a 6-year-old, in grade 1, who the police was called about, and then the police then, put handcuffs on her hands and shackles on her feet. And she waited almost a half hour on her belly, and this was in reaction to, a disciplinary matter. I mean, it's sort of a great example of what I mean by holding this idea of people's individual discretion and not having a systemic response to disrupt the potential outcomes of that.
Kika, it's interesting. There was an article in the Varsity earlier this year, and it says Black students aren't dropping out, they are pushed out, and it's situations like this that pushes them out. Can you talk very quickly about streaming and how that affects how a Black person goes through high school?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrea. I mean, Black kids are 2.5 more times likely to be streamed out of academic and into some of the lower streams, and there are a couple of them. And, I think what's significant about that is that it impacts the trajectory of their lives. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from parents who weren't told what the implications of a stream, of a particular stream would be when that so-called choice was being offered to them. And I think it's important to note that white children are 1.5 times more likely to be streamed into academic. So we see very particular patterns afoot. And, ideally, streams are meant to be responsive to the type of learner, but instead we see a very color-coded streaming pattern.
There's so much to get to here, and I don't want to end on such a tough question, but educational reform. I mean, it sounds like a monumental task, but where do we begin to start to change the education system?
Like, this idea that I was speaking of around neutrality, right? And so the assumption that our system is neutral is the underpinning idea in our education system. And as a result, when we're then talking about, how do we change some of the outcomes and the disproportionalities and disparities that we're seeing in our data and our outcomes, that the options that we take and the moves that we make and the strategies that we take up need to first acknowledge that systemic racism and anti-Black racism in particular is alive and well in our system. And so first things first, let's acknowledge that. Let's disrupt the idea that our systems are neutral. And then let's start to build accountability frameworks that will support the disruption of the patterns that we're seeing, right? So how do we support decision-making around expulsion, suspensions, streaming, and discipline, right? When we know that those are particular outcomes, particular sites where we're seeing particular outcomes that are problematic.
Just going to pause it and end it right there. She said so many good nuggets in there about how anti-Black racism shows up in schools. She even gave a nice anecdotal story about a 6-year-old getting arrested with handcuffs. And we know that happened last year in the Waterloo Catholic District School Board, where the police was called on a 4-year-old child. We've seen it happen also, again, with the police being called on a 6-year-old child. Even last week, a Durham teacher allegedly used a racial slur, the N-word, in the classroom. So we see it happening in our school systems. And now we have a name, now we have a term, now we know what it's called, and it's anti-Black racism. It's the more office suspensions, disproportionate amount of students being referred to inclusive student services. We've seen the lack of textbooks, lack of learning about Black excellence, lower expectations for Black students, like over policing Black students and also seeing them as the aggressor in conflicts, being assessed as having poor learning skills. So all the learning skills on your child's report card, those are all subjective, right? And that's assuming that your teacher has no biases, nothing within their heads against Black people. And that's a pretty tall order, because if you're not thinking about your biases and really working to debunk them, then you're perpetuating it, right? Like you watch the news, the media, a lot of negative light for Black people. Black parents to be assumed to be angry. I've seen it in the work that I do, talking with other educators saying like, oh, I'm afraid to call mom. She may yell, mom is moody, all these things about the parent where you're like, okay, well, you know what? These are their children. These are their best that they have. Black History Month regulating to just having the slave narrative, right? We just talking about the slaves and not talking about the Black excellence. Less likely to have educators that look like you, placing international students in a lower grade. I've heard people who come from Jamaica back in the day and they would put them in the ESL class because they assumed that they couldn't speak English. The restrictive dress code. And again, some of these things are being debunked. So you used to not be able to wear a do-rag or a head wrap. And those are things that are culturally, like that's what, sometimes we want to cover our hair. Sometimes we want to lay down the edges. That used to be a uniform infraction, or that you couldn't have that because they thought it was gang related. And also the hyper surveillance of Black students. So again, you're policing the Black students more, and that's why there's disproportionate amount of suspensions. And the streaming, which has recently been debunked in our school board, so as to not stream students into only going to the lower level classes like the applied classes and not being streamed to the university level classes. So in the Durham board, Black students accounted for over 2 times the number of suspensions compared to the representation in the student census. So that means that out of the 9% of Black students that were in the Durham School Board that were surveyed, they represented 19% of all students that got suspended. So out of the 100 students, 19% of students that were suspended were Black. That's double their representation. So it should be like if there's 9% Black students, there should be 9% Black students being suspended, 9% of the Black students that are actually suspended, not 19, not double the amount. So it's not saying that Black students they don't know how to behave. It is attributed to the system, right? We're over policing them. We are hyper surveilling them. We have our prejudices, our biases towards these students. Like the disproportionate amount is too high for it to be fair, for it to make sense. It doesn't make sense. So I'll just let you take that in for a second. So in the Durham board, Black students accounted for over 2 times the number of suspensions compared to their representation in the census. That's huge, double the amount. And all this has an effect. Like we cannot live in the system and not affect us in a negative way. So it hurts. Like children and youth are vulnerable to the effects of anti-Black racism. They may experience it firsthand at school, in the community, or indirectly by hearing about it in adult conversations. So they're also hearing about it as we're talking about it, as we find it in the workplace. So, and it's hard for young people to even put a word to it or even for them to express themselves about it, right? Or even understand what it is or what the microaggressions are. Like, why do people want to touch my hair? Or how come people don't are always looking at me and they don't like my food and they don't like what I bring to school, right? So there was an effect there. And I know I grew up in a predominantly white area and we didn't have a name called microaggressions, but I always knew that I was different. I always knew that did not fit in to the other students. And I was reminded of that every single day. So the effects of it can be seen. You could be a shift in their academic performance, reverting to younger behaviors, avoidance to attend school. Sometimes students don't even want to go to school because of, maybe they don't have friends. Maybe they're excluded from playing with others. A loss of interest in regular activities. They could get decreased self-esteem, increased anger, worry, fear, loss of hope. So just different things where, like when it's attack on yourself, an attack on your identity, may not be directly or it could be indirectly, and it hurts. And it was even seen. So in the Durham census, again, they surveyed students in grades 7 and 8 and grade 10 and 11. And their academic average in English and in math were 10% less than the overall average. So what does that say? Like it's saying that, that it does have an effect on students. And it's not because Black students are not as smart. It should be average. It should be at par. So it's obviously the system, and the data has shown that the system is broken and that we need to actively work to counteract it. So my suggestion is to get to know your child's teacher, get to know, email them, phone them, be in contact with them on a regular basis, really be involved within your child's education. Just even emailing them and saying, how are you doing? I just wanted to know how my child is doing. What are we learning in school today? Really making your space visible and giving them that accountability. Ask about representation in what they're learning. Students learn about ancient civilizations. Do they learn about ancient civilizations within Africa besides ancient Egypt? There's so many other ones that they can learn about. Even you as a parent, a community member, can bring your knowledge into the classroom, right? Now that the schools are starting to open up more, parents are okay to come in there and say, you know what, I have a really good book that I would love to share with the students. I can do a read aloud with the students. Really try to get involved. There's no rules against that. And volunteer if you can. If you're able to volunteer, if you have a parent or a friend that can volunteer, definitely get involved. With the representation matters. So read books about Black people as doctors, lawyers, astronauts at home too as well, and say, you know what, if this is a good book, send it to school with your child so that they can read it at school. And get involved within the community. So we have community supports where if you feel like your child's not being treated fairly, you can reach out. So I'm part of a Durham group within the Durham board, and some parents post some things that are happening at school, and we can definitely say, you know what, no, that's not right. Your child should not be feeling this way, or your child shouldn't be experiencing these things. And definitely, I've seen teachers give children 0 with no justification, and they're not really giving account to the students' lived experiences. So definitely be involved, get involved, reach out to community supports, the Durham Family and Cultural Center. They're there to help you as well. So if you feel like your child's not being treated fairly, this is what you can do. So I have another video about representation.
I am what I am. I don't want praise.
Imagine growing up in a world where you are overlooked. What if you do not see yourself anywhere? What if you don't feel any connection? Until society represents everyone, the questions will always be, where do I belong? Do I belong? It is time to rethink representation. Now, I believe representation is vital because it provides the opportunity for your existence to be acknowledged in this world. Now, representation can take many forms, some of which are more obvious than others and some of which cannot be seen. After all, we all have many identities. You cannot see that I am dyslexic. You might not know that I believe in God, but the one thing that you can definitely see is that I'm Black. Representation matters. Now, of all of my identities, my race has had the biggest impact on my life. And the reason why it's had such an impact on my life is because it's so significant. And whilst I may have many different identities, it's through the lens of race that I talk to you today. I want to explore racial representation over time because I've always had this need to see representation. The theme has been a golden thread throughout my life. So it's the 80s. My nan is a nurse in a Bristol hospital, and she's on her lunch break, and her colleague is reading a newspaper, and there is a picture of a monkey. He calls her over and he says, "Evelyn, have a look at this. It's your cousin." Now, my nan was deeply upset and disturbed by this, and she spoke to the sister in charge, only to be told, "Do not take this to the Race Relation Board because he will lose his job." An apology would suffice. But it's different now, isn't it? It's the 90s. My mum is a primary school teacher. And she talks of a time when she went to a kick racism at a football event, and she and the children were chanted at. They suffered the most horrific racism, and yet not one person challenged it, only to seek counsel from her head teacher and then be told, "Leave your culture at the door," as if she could unzip her Black skin, hang it up, and collect it at the end of the day. But it's different now, isn't it? It's 2010, and my colleague calls me her coffee-colored friend, or perhaps a latte. Now, I challenge her on this, and I explain to her that I identify as Black, and she says, "I do not care what you say." Then she refers to a student, and she says, "But you see him, he's Black, so Black he's scary." But it's different now, isn't it? It's 2013, and my 5th generation of my family are in the UK. And my youngest, he comes home from school and he's upset. And I'm like, "Why are you crying?" He says, "Mummy, my friend said I can't come to your party because I'm Black. And I don't want to be Black anymore." Imagine the pain in my heart when my son says to me, "I don't want to be Black anymore because to be Black means exclusion." But it's different now, isn't it? It's now 2019, and this is my baby. And me and him are at a restaurant and we're talking. And then he starts to panic, and I'm like, "Well, what's wrong?" He then points over and he says, "Mummy, look, there's 2 police officers." "So?" "But Mummy, they hurt Black people." Now, where has he got this from? Because it's not from me, and it's certainly not from his home life. It's from his social environment. And he's 8 years old, and he already has this fear. So my question to you is, so is it different now? Now, these lived experiences are just some examples of the overt racism that me and my family have suffered. But what we must not neglect to do is talk about the subtle, the unconscious, the "I don't see color" type of racism. I go to complete an application form. I only have 2 options: Black African, Black Caribbean. I don't have the choice of being Black British, and yet my parents are born here. I was born here. I blow dry my hair straight. I like to mix it up a little bit. You know, sometimes. And then my colleague says to me, "Aisha, you look beautiful, you look stunning. Please keep your hair straight. That is the best version of you." As if my natural kinky coily hair is too extreme and isn't the best version of me. So I travel a lot in my job, and I travel from London to Bristol. And I'm on a packed train, and I offer a seat next to me, only for the lady to say, nope, I'd rather stand. So then the person in front of me, a white passenger, same offer, yes, please. I go to a training event, and I pick up my badge, and I sign in with my name and my title. Excuse me, are you sure you got the right badge? Yeah, last time I checked, I was Aisha Thomas, and I'm an assistant principal. Don't want to lost the badge. These are just some of my everyday experiences, and it's difficult to express and share. What these stories have taught me to do, they've taught me to cope, to deal, to navigate, and sometimes to accept. And I have, to be honest, I have accepted racism and discrimination, but this is something that I can no longer do. However, getting to this point has not been easy. It has to be a true understanding of representation, and that's what I've had to learn along the way. So about 10 years ago, I was volunteering for the Prince's Trust, and I was working with young people, and I was helping them to get from prison and reintegrate into society. Now, volunteering in a young offenders institution is tough. I still remember the patting down of my body, the clanging of the keys, the locking of every door behind me, and the visiting hall was so cold I could literally see my breath as I spoke. I felt scared, I felt trapped, and I felt vulnerable. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel free. And as I sat there, I waited for this strong, arrogant, full of attitude and confidence young man to approach me. But where did I get this mental picture from? Was it the media? Was it music? Was it TV? Representation matters. But instead, this young, childlike figure approached me, full of so much hope of a second chance, and yet he changed my life. So one day we were talking, and he stopped and he paused, and he said, perhaps if you were my teacher, I wouldn't be in prison today. All the white people in charge are the ones that get to make the decisions. And if I want to be successful, I've got to be a drug dealer, I've got to be a footballer, or I've got to be an actor. Because that's the only way I can make money, and that's the only success that I see. Representation matters. Now, you've got to look at this and really understand that this young person saw his success in crime, actually in crime. Then it dawned on me, what if you do see representation, but it has a specific narrative? If only he knew positive representation existed, but he had been denied access to it. At this point, I knew I was not having enough impact on young people. I was getting to them far too late. They were already part of the justice system. So then I decided to transition from the legal profession into education. Imagine empowering a young person to believe that they belong, so much so that they genuinely thrive in spite of prejudice. Now, that should be the norm, shouldn't it? But it's not the norm. Every day, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic children are educated without seeing themselves in the curriculum or their environment. They walk into the classroom and they hear about the greatness of others, all that they have conquered and all that they have contributed. Then they look at their skin and they say to themselves, where do I belong? What have my people achieved? Now, the Swan Report 1985 said, education for all, and yet we still continue to live in a time where inequalities in schools continue to dominate. 32 years later, the Runnymede Trust report found that Bristol is a divided city. There is an evident lack of diversity in both teaching staff and leadership. Just 4.
I'll just end that one there because they go on to talk about Bristol, and we're in Canada, but the same method, the same theme applies, right? Not having your child being represented within the curriculum, within the school, within the community that they are learning has a negative effect, and it affects them. And we really have to take a look at our system to really, and I could even send the link to that video too as well. Thank you. To really just see, like, we need to have our children represented in the best possible light within our systems as possible. And so now that we know the problem is there, we can help to counteract it, help to fight against it. So I just have some books here. Like, changes are happening. So it's not all doom and gloom. You can go to Indigo. They have a diversity section where you can find excellent text, picture books, storybooks, chapter books on Black excellence. We have May Among the Stars. She was an astronaut. Katherine Johnson, she was part of the Hidden Figures in that movie too as well. It's there. We're able to access it more. We're seeing that the need is being fulfilled for this. So it's there. So it's going to get better. So lastly, I'm going to talk about inclusive student services. So we know that part of anti-Black racism was having students, Black students in particularly, being referred to inclusive student services at a disproportionately higher rate, especially for behavior individual education plans. So, and that it's very subjective. So a student could just be referred for having behaviors and they'd have their own individual learning plan. So in IEP is a written plan describing the special education program or services for a particular student. And then it would include like accommodations or modifications for the student to meet their goals. So it could be, they could have accommodations to the, like where they take their tests, where they work, where they learn, or they could actually have modifications to what they're learning. So they could be in grade 4, learning things in grade 2. So just different things that can be applied to that individual education plan. And so before, it would just be kind of put on the students and the parents. I don't know if they didn't feel like they had the input to make the decisions, but they accepted it as it is. But this is a running document. This is an open document. This is a document that parents can help to input it, right? They can help to assess it. So every year, the IEP gets reviewed and said, okay, the student need these accommodations, or do these students need these modifications anymore? And it could be taken off, right? So it's something that you can ask to see it at any time. You can ask the teacher, the educator, how are they meeting the goals of the individual education plan? And you can print it off and have it so that you can see what your child is learning and really take an active role. And I know because Black students were disproportionately referred to inclusive services or special education, there's that stigma where they felt like they don't want their child to be identified. And now it's come to a point where students who need the support aren't getting the support because there's that stigma. And we really want to debunk the stigma that if your child needs the support, if they've got a learning disability, if they've got, they need some help with accommodations, even stress and anxiety, that could be something that can be accommodated for their education, right? If they have the anxiety, they could be given the test questions ahead of time so that they can study and know what's happening. They could get longer time to take their test in a separate room so that they don't see other students finishing first, and that brings on more anxiety. So individual learning plans can really help your student achieve, and to debunking the stigmas of saying, I don't want my child to be identified could really hurt them. So it's important that if your child has a learning difficulty, that they get the support, but that as a parent or a guardian or a support person, that you're there at the table helping to make those decisions. And you don't have to come to the meetings alone. That's where you can pull in the Durham Family Cultural Center or Kajenga or family supports within your community to come with you to the meetings. Because again, when you're talking to the teacher about your child, it may be hard to take in all that information, but if you have a third party, someone who's neutral, to take the notes down, to really be just eyes and ears for you, that can help too as well. So don't ever feel like you have to go to these meetings alone, because teachers go, they have their principals there, they have the special education resource teacher there, or and now they call it the inclusive student services resource teacher there with them for their meeting. So it's important that you have someone there too as well, right? To help you to take notes, to really help advocate for your child. We are no longer just sitting and assuming that the teachers have all the knowledge and that they're always going to do what's best and what's right for your student, because it's been proven that it hasn't happened, right? So we do want to give them some checks and balances, and so that we can be there and really make them accountable. And that's all it is just having that accountability for our teachers, for the school system, so that our Black students can succeed. So do we have any questions, any comments? I know people enjoy the TED Talk. I can put the link in the chat so we can see the whole thing if you're interested. I mean, there's so many great resources out there. I'm glad that we are talking about this now. I'm glad that we're giving the name to the anti-Black racism. I'm glad that we have the stats to back up all of our research and findings and all that good stuff. So can you talk about safety plans and the role of the parent input? Awesome. Ooh, that's a great question. Again, a safety plan, similar to an IEP, parents can be in there. Parents can definitely, they need to be consulted, because sometimes with those safety plans, it could be if your child is, if your child runs outside of the school property. So if you have a child who's a runner and they run outside of their classroom, or if they run outside of the school, a safety plan would say, after like 5 minutes, we call parents, or after 10 minutes, we call parents, or really trying to notify the parents when there is an incident occurring. So definitely, if you know, if a teacher is approaching you and saying, we want a safety plan for your child, you definitely can be at the table there. You can read it over and put your input in for sure. Sometimes even if students they experience like aggressive behavior, or if they are throwing things, there could be a time limit where parents need to be notified, and parents need to have that input, because if they're working and say they said after 5 minutes we notify parents, and if parents don't come to pick up in 10 minutes, we will go on to calling the police, or we're elevating the situation. No, you want to be able to, as a parent, say that, you know what, the soonest I can come pick up my child would be in 30 minutes. You need to wait then before you elevate the situation, or you need to contact person B, C, and D if you can't get a hold of me. So definitely. So safety plans are for a plan for the safety of the student, a plan for the safety of other students in the classrooms. If you have a student who's a biter, there could be a safety plan for that. But parents definitely need to be informed, and you can also put your input and say, you know, I don't agree with this, and I'm not going to sign. So it does need to be signed off by parents too as well, because it does concern the student. That's a great question. Thank you so much. Did I answer it? Is there anything else? So definitely parent, and the whole theme I want to address today is like, parents have input, right? You have input. This is your child's education. We're a publicly funded system. So definitely you have input into the system, right? And how your child is learning and obtaining information. Any other questions? Or anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to discuss? Let me check the question and answer up here. And again, if you are having trouble navigating those systems, if you did get a safety plan and they just handed it to you, you can call the Durham Family Culture Center, us, Kajenga Wellness, and definitely ask them to look it over, ask them to help navigate the system. So I hope this webinar was informative for you. We want to know that there is anti-Black racism happening in the school system, but now that we know it, we can do our best to kind of counteract it. Where really the teachers within the Durham board are learning more about it, learning about their own biases, learning about racism. I mean, incidents are still happening, but it's a lot better than it was, and it can only go better from here on, right? So we just wanted to make sure parents have knowledge and understand what's happening out there in the school system, and just try to get involved as possible as you can. And if you cannot, bring in your community, bring in your village, right? To really help you stand in the gap for your child and your student. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to put back in Nicholas's information. So those who may have missed it, Nicholas from the Durham Family Cultural Center, he is an advocate, and I'll just put his contact information too as well. And they advocate for, put that back in there, for just family services within the school, within the community. So there are people there to help you advocate. So you're not in this alone. We really want the best outcomes possible for our children and our youth. And also our information in there, info@kajengafamily.org. Our website too as well. I don't know if technical support can put our website in there. Thank you so much for attending. And we're here. So if you have any other questions, if you want to see webinars about different information, different things that affect you, we have health webinars, all that good stuff, we're here. Oh, and our website is kajengafamily.org. And we also provide tutoring support. So if you or know anyone else within the area, we do it online. We do online tutoring. So that is something too as well. It's reading support, math support, homework support. So all those things that we want to help your child to become successful, we have that available. All right, so if we don't have any other questions, that's all for me. Thank you so much for attending. Again, this will be up online. So if you wanted to go back to any of the videos or see anything else, everything will be online for our YouTube page. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for participating.